Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon conference on transportation and its impact on energy. I am Commissioner Bob Gordon. About 14 days ago, I joined the New Jersey Board of Public Utilities, having spent 14 years in the New Jersey legislature. And when I left the New Jersey Senate, it was as chairman of the Senate Transportation Committee. So this is a subject with which I've got great interest. We're pleased to have several authorities with us today who can comment on how we can reduce our emission of greenhouse gases through technological changes in transportation. We will hear today first from Alain Kornhauser, who's Professor of Operations Research and Financial Engineering and Director of the Program in Transportation at Princeton University. His bio should be in your packet, but he is an expert on driverless vehicle technology. He's going to give us an update on the status of the technology. We will also hear from Vicki Arroyo, who's the Executive Director of the Georgetown Climate Center, who's going to provide an overview of the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which is an initiative involving 11 states, which is attempting to develop strategies to reduce emissions from the transportation sector. Also with us today, Rob Stewart, who's going to talk about his work on driverless, electric vehicle technology in New Jersey and in other states, and Peter Rose, who is going to talk about the experience in Quebec. So we know that the transportation sector is the greatest source of greenhouse gas emissions. I believe in New Jersey it accounts for 46% of greenhouse gas emissions. Vehicles are the largest source. And we're not going to be able to achieve the goals that policymakers in our states are calling for unless we do something in the transportation sector. So, Professor Kornhauser, where are we in terms of the technology?
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Smart driving cars. I've decided to give them my own name because everybody is so confused about what they are. And so therefore, I decided to do my own. And what I first would like to begin is to make sure that we're talking about the same thing, and this confusion between whether or not it's autonomous, connected, automated, 4 NHTSA levels, 5 SAE levels, who knows? Nobody, I mean, it's just, and you read it in the Sunday supplements and you're just confused. And what I like to do is talk about only 3 kinds, and it's really important to talk about them because they're so different from their business case, and they're so different from their implications. And one is safe driving cars, trucks or buses. These are basically cars that don't crash, that stay in their lanes, that actually keep us from misbehaving. And really, the misbehavior, this is the speedometer in my car. It shows 160 miles an hour in New Jersey. I mean, come on, really? And what these things really should have are always-on automated emergency braking, lane centering, and speed limiting on them, so that when we don't see something ahead, they stop. In some sense, they should be like this. We are there having a ball, and our mother is keeping us safe. And that's what this technology is meant to do, and it should do. Now, how we get there and so on, we don't know, but this is what everybody talks about, this automation. This is what brings the safety piece of it. Okay, you don't have to take your hands off the wheel, feet off the brakes, or be chauffeured around. And we have some companies that are beginning to offer this. Lexus and so on say they have it in all their vehicles. And insurance really should be out there holding our hands when we buy these things because they can make more money if we buy the ones that are safe, and they should be helping us. But unfortunately, they probably don't work well enough. There are things like false alarms. Because of the false alarm, they turn it off at 30 miles an hour, and therefore you hit a woman that's walking a bicycle across the street. And it's not very pretty. And how we go beyond this, I don't know. Insurance can help. The industry should help. We should demand it when we go out and buy these vehicles. And the big implication is safety. And insurance can help, and healthcare systems, well, you know, we won't have to go out to the hospital as often. The body shops might get hurt also. Police, what do? 50% of the police in Princeton deal with traffic and fining us when we misbehave. And when are they going to be available? They're becoming to be available in the showroom now, and they will get better. The second piece is self-driving cars and trucks and buses. And that's basically taking the safe driving technology and taking it hopefully a little bit farther that allows us to take our hands off the wheel and feet off the pedals, at least on some stretches of road, in some places at some times. But we really need to remain alert and vigilant when we use this technology because it's really not good enough. But it does develop some great user comfort and convenience. You know, we might be able to even go out and do what we already do, which is all this while we're driving. And my goodness, and I claim it's really the new chrome and fin of the automobile industry. I mean, we want this so bad so that we can text that we'll probably pay anything for it. And so, of course, Detroit and Stuttgart and so on is really making these things available to us now, as well as in our Teslas and so on. But what it brings us is not safety. We'd be lucky if it can be as good as safe driving cars, but it does bring us an enormous amount of comfort and convenience. And what that's going to do is it's going to take vehicle miles traveled through the roof. So you should be aware of this. Because greenhouse gases are proportional to what? Vehicle miles traveled. Energy is proportional to what? Vehicle miles traveled. If it's easier, more comfortable, and so on to travel, oh, there's all that cheap land out there. Of course we're going to go get it. And so on. It may accelerate sprawl. It'll make driving as an occupation a lot better. We won't have driver shortages in the trucking industry. Why? Because, you know, one of the reasons we have driver shortages is that's a tough job. And if we made it better, then that would help. And auto companies will make more money. BMW will become the ultimate riding machine instead of driving machine. And when? Soon. I don't know how many of you already have your Teslas and you use your autopilot, you know, whatever, and so on and so forth. The third, which is really the important one, is the driverless. That means there's no driver in the vehicle. It is a mobility service. It's safe driving by, you know, there's no steering wheel. And it just chauffeurs you around, at least in some places at some times. And so this, what it does is delivers mobility and high-quality mobility to all, at least in the places where it offers it. And so, in a sense, with that, it might also deliver some environmental benefits, but you saw I had the maybe on there. And so what it does is in providing that affordable, high-quality level of service mobility to all, the young, the old, the disabled, VMT may very well go through the roof for the same reason that the self-driving vehicles took it through the roof. So we need to be careful. More people would want to travel more places and take advantage of more. Hey, quality of life would go up. We should be happy about that, but the negative consequences we have to be careful about. Unless we have substantial ride sharing. And the ride sharing is really the important piece that nobody talks about. And we've looked at the billion trips that take place on a typical day like today across the United States, at each of the individual ones that go to school, that go to work, that go to shop, that go to a bar, that come home from the bar, that do all those things, that go to the shore. And it turns out there is, even though because of the vast spatial and temporal variation of all those strips, there is substantial opportunity for ride sharing. And that ride sharing opportunity, especially if you then take this with respect to first and last mile, all of a sudden does a great benefit to both transit and Amtrak. And if we take those opportunities together, you could actually reduce VMT by 50%. There's nobody that's talking about reducing VMT by 50%, cutting it in half. There could be a 5x increase in the ridership in New Jersey Transit Rail. Oh my goodness, they'd have to run trains every 5 minutes. There'd be a 100x increase in the opportunities to move people between cities on Amtrak's. The cities that are 150 miles to 300 miles apart, that in fact, because of the collection and distribution opportunities of these things, would now make those links very viable. And it all depends on sharing a ride. And how to do that, that involves sociology. I'm an engineer, sorry, I'm out of here. I can't help you with that one. But that could really make a difference. Now the question is when? Is it like thermonuclear fusion? We've been talking about that. It's going to be in 50 years for 50 years. And so when is this really coming? And I guess that's what the important thing is. 2 days ago, this is the governor of Ohio. I know he's lame duck and whatever because of time limit. But man, out there saying that even though what's been going on with this thing, he wants to make it the wild Midwest, I guess, and it's not self-driving, it's really driverless, because if you look at what he promulgated, and you go through all the therefores, the whatevers, and so on, and the therefores, what's important on the therefore is all autonomous vehicles tested in Ohio must have a designated operator. Designated operators are not required to be inside the vehicle. So in fact, he's there saying, yes, driverless vehicles that could provide very affordable mobility to all in shared modes, please come to Ohio. And he's really put out the welcome mat. And it's a welcome mat saying, come to Ohio. It's also, I think we can take from the welcome mat, make sure you wipe your feet and do it responsibly. So if we look at this, there's a company, Waymo, some of you may have heard of it. It's an offshoot of Google. What they did in 2009 is they went down to the Lexus dealer and bought 2 Priuses and played around with it. Then a few years later or so, they went out and bought 20 Lexis. And then they built, a couple years later, 200 of those guys. And then in 2017, they bought 2,000 of those from Chrysler and are operating them as we speak today with nobody in the vehicle, providing mobility in Chandler, Arizona. And of course, a month or so ago, said they were buying 20,000 of these guys. And the interesting thing of just that data, since we're in big data these days, that's big data. Whew. And in fact, that's almost a hockey stick with that little last point. But the interesting thing about this is that it's a Semilog plot. It's already exponential. It says that basically they've been buying 10x vehicles every 2 years, which suggests if it continues to go, we should never extrapolate any curve. That means they'll be buying 200,000 in 2 years. And 2 million in 2 years after that, and maybe 20 million 2 years after that. It only takes 35 million of these things to provide mobility to everybody in North America and provide it completely. So in a sense, where are they going? Well, what might Waymo do? That's Waymo there in the blue in the center with the 20,000 Jaguars. Well, I don't think it can eat them. It's not quite the Cookie Monster. It could maybe house 20,000 homeless in San Francisco, maybe, maybe they'll put them to work. Maybe they'll take the United States and maybe they'll spread 1,000 of these things at a few places that are put out the welcome mat and say, hey, you know, we have mobility challenges here and we'd like to see if we can do this in the shared environment. And in fact, maybe when they do that, they might look right here. In fact, right here in Mercer County, which really we are a microcosm of the United States, and my goodness, have a perfect place for them. And geez, if they brought them here, whoa. Yes, please. How do we do that? Well, maybe we go to the neighborhoods who, you know, in Princeton, I sat on the planning board for, we learned how to say no 2 million ways, you know, not my backyard. But maybe we go to the streets of Princeton or streets of Trenton and say, if you let us run these things down your street, would you mind? And some people say, oh no, my child is out there, it's gonna run them over. Or the others might say, hey, yeah, go ahead and do it. We put together a network for those who say, hey, yeah, go ahead and do it. We'll provide them services. We'll let them be mobile. We'll let those that are mobility challenged in Trenton to be able to go to the Robbinsville facility and be able to go to work and be able to improve themselves and be able to do what they need to do. Those that don't want their backyard, that's fine. You wait in line. And then they'll see, and we'll get to try it. And try it with 1,000, and then, you know, maybe 10,000, and we'll see where we'll take it. And so out of all this, next week we're having a Princeton's second annual Smart Driving Car Summit, in which we'll debate all this stuff to every gnat's eyelash. But it's coming, and that curve from Waymo, it could stop. It could, you know, it could come to a halt. But boy, it's about to be here soon.
Thank you, Professor. Vicki?
Sure. Well, thank you, Rona and CSG and Princeton for inviting me to speak. It's really a pleasure to spend time with legislators. Our center at Georgetown, the Georgetown State Federal Climate Resource Center, which is a mouthful, so we mostly go by Georgetown Climate Center for short, has been a resource for states for almost 10 years now in Washington, D.C., where we have offices at the Hall of States and at Georgetown Law, where I also teach. And we work on a variety of things, including transportation, but also I'll just mention, because I know some of you are interested in it based on conversations and panels, fighting some of the rollbacks at the federal level on the Clean Power Plan, helping to aggregate the state comments with mostly the executive branch agencies that are relevant there, and also adaptation to climate change, where we have some resources and tools that you might be interested in, including a very comprehensive adaptation clearinghouse and something that tracks what states are doing on adaptation. So please check those out at Georgetown Climate. In the meantime, I want to spend my time here talking to you about the Transportation and Climate Initiative, which has actually gone on now since 2010, so we're in our 8th year, and it combines the energy and environment agencies who've been working together for many years now on RGGI with their transportation counterparts. And you see one of the many meetings that we've had, bringing these leaders together of those agencies across these jurisdictions. We've been working together now in work groups and on a variety of things with the goal of reducing energy use and emissions from the transportation sector, as you've heard many times, the largest sector of emissions in the region. And I will say, before I move on to EVs, which I want to focus on, in addition to working on electric vehicles and some policy work that I want to mainly talk about today, we've had other work groups that have focused on things like sustainable communities. So they're really trying to also integrate work with MPOs and more at the local level. Freight movement throughout the region. We've studied freight flows throughout the region. We also helped to beat back a patent troll who was suing states over the use of real-time information. So we've had a lot of fun. We didn't know we were going to get into all that when we started serving the states 10 years ago, and the TCI states in particular 8 years ago. But one way that we've worked together on transportation is in coordination with the states. We were successful in getting a pretty large DOE grant a few years ago which help to inform guidance documents on siting charging infrastructure, dealing with challenges. If I put in a charging station, does that make me a regulated utility? What do I do about ADA compliance? What do I do about multi-unit dwellings? All those kind of tricky questions that people are dealing with. We have some guidance documents that we've worked on with the states over the years and created a virtual, if not actual so far, Northeast electric vehicle network, in part to engage stakeholders who've signed pledges to adopt more electric vehicles in their fleets and help with charging, et cetera. And over the past couple of years, we've been working very much on corridor planning. We actually were able to work with the states once again and secure the corridor designations throughout this region. I think it was the largest region in the country that was recognized by DOT for these corridor designations. And to support the states, we've also developed a corridor analysis tool that identifies priority locations for additional charging infrastructure. So you might want to check that out. You can plug in different options, like putting some charging infrastructure in rural areas or putting it more where the population centers are, and see what that does. And we worked on that with our partners at MJ Bradley and Associates. Many of you were really responsible for the kind of targets that are reflected here, the states that have greenhouse gas emission goals. So thank you, as a resident of these communities. And we all know that we're not really getting there, and it's going to be even more difficult to reach these goals if the federal government succeeds in some of the rollbacks that the Pruitt EPA are trying to do as it relates to motor vehicle emissions and, frankly, the Clean Power Plan standards as well. But specifically, the transportation sector will get a lot harder than it already is if the fuel economy standards get cut back and the California waiver is denied, or any other challenges to the federal program, because it makes the baseline that states are going to have to reduce from even harder to reach. We've been doing analysis on this even before the rollbacks, back when the last administration was more favorable about federal policy. We did these reports with Cambridge Systematics to inform the states that in 2015 wanted to work together on developing potential market-based policy solutions to achieve significant reductions in greenhouse gas emissions and other pollution from the sector. And you see just some of the quick highlights that while we're not on track to meet the long-term emission goals, regional greenhouse gas reductions are possible up to even 40%. There's also economic benefits of doing that, because sort of like with RGGI, you keep the money in the region, people spend it on other things that promote local economic development. If you look at air quality benefits, public health benefits, and all that, it really adds up over time, as you can see here. So I commend that report to you. That came out, like I said, in 2015 around the Paris Climate Agreement. And the states that were involved in that statement are highlighted here in gray. And in 2017, of course, following the election and following two large symposia that we held with a wide variety of stakeholders, including many folks from the private sector, both companies that ship goods and make goods, and car companies and fuel companies, and lots of people, environmental justice advocates, as well as traditional environmental NGOs and other stakeholders. Two large symposia in Washington, D.C. and in New York City during Climate Week helped to inform this announcement that came out in the Bonn climate talks of the states that were added in 2017, which include, as you see, the states here. Notably, I think, since we really always aim to work in a bipartisan way, 3 of the states that signed on are Republican-led states. And so this announcement that was made around the time of Bonn, that actually was announced by states, there were 11 states that we helped with partners bring to the climate talks this year to talk about the fact that there is still this forward momentum in the states here in the U.S. despite what the federal government was doing. And that group was also bipartisan. That's when this announcement was made, and it mainly announced that a process that had informed some reports that are now on our website about using a potential, for example, cap and invest system as an example. It works for RGGI, looking at what that might do in the case of applying a price signal like that in the fuel system, and benefiting from input that we've gotten over the years, frankly, from many discussions with other states, Oregon with their VMT approach, VMT tax or voluntary VMT charge. California is with its fuels under the cap, British Columbia with a carbon tax. So a lot of that work informed getting to this point of this announcement of a more public set of listening sessions that have already begun, and I really encourage you to please participate in these as they're going to be held throughout the region this spring. You might know that Massachusetts itself had announced its own set of listening sessions last fall, and we've been building on that with sessions that, again, are really trying to cast a broad net and invite all comers who have an interest in this and who live in these areas. We've had one in Albany that was greatly successful. There's one in Hartford, Connecticut on May 21st, in Wilmington, Delaware in June 6th, and we'll have some other ones announced shortly. Some states like Rhode Island and Massachusetts are also doing some of their own in-state listening sessions, which have drawn a variety of stakeholders talking about the vision of a low-carbon transportation future in the region, the challenges of getting there, how that can be done, the opportunities that come from that, especially if you generate resources like in the RGGI instance where those resources are reinvested. A lot of the table action that we saw in Albany were people brainstorming about electric bus fleets or providing support for local communities for more bike and ped, complete streets kind of investments, electric vehicles for people that might not otherwise be able to afford them. So in any case, a lot of really good ideas coming out of this. Investment in resilience is another topic that came up, but it's an opportunity to really engage other leaders like you and stakeholders. I just want to emphasize in closing that the TCI states have not yet selected any policy or set of policies. They are very much still in listening mode. However, a large majority, or a majority, I should say, of the states have publicly expressed their commitment to pursuing regional strategies for not only reducing emissions, but also improving the safety, reliability, affordability, and accessibility of transportation for people and goods throughout the region. And so we hope you'll join us in that endeavor. It's very important, as you know, because transportation is the largest source. We really have to roll up our sleeves and figure out how to tackle this together. Look forward to working with you on next steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicki. Rob, you want to tell us about what's going on with Pepco?
All right, good afternoon. I'm Rob Stewart, Manager of Smart Grid and Technology for Pepco Holdings. And we're the holding company for Atlantic City Electric, Delmarva Power, and Potomac Electric Power Company. So my intention here today was to talk about what we're planning for electric vehicles in New Jersey. However, late in the process, we realized that Commissioner Gordon was going to chair the panel, and since it's an open docket, and Commissioner Shivakula is here, since it's an open docket, then it's probably best if we don't discuss it publicly. So the last time I was asked to speak on electric vehicles, I was asked to speak for 10 minutes, and I went for an hour. So now I only have one slide, and that's it. So no, seriously, I've taken a lot of the details out, and I'll talk at a higher level. We have electric vehicle activities across each one of our companies. So as you know, we are Atlantic City Electric. This is the service territory and some aspect of what we serve there. This is kind of the Pepco Holdings companies, if you will, Washington, D.C. and the greater Maryland suburbs, Delmarva Power as well. So total of about 1.8 million customers served there. And then if you know, we are part of the Exelon family of companies, which gives us Baltimore Gas and Electric, which sits in between Pepco and Delmarva, as well as Philadelphia Electric Company, which sits just to the west of ACE, and then Com Edison in Chicago. So about 34,000 employees, about 10 million electric meters. So the benefit of that is that we're all working collaboratively in a lot of these different areas. I came to Pepco 25 years ago to manage the electric vehicle program then. And I can assure you I haven't been doing the same thing for 25 years. But it's encouraging that it's now back underneath me again. My team manages the edge of the smart grid. So this is beyond the investments that we're making in the smart grid. Things like integration of renewables, integration of electric vehicle charging, battery storage, microgrids, all the different aspects that we're now going to leverage the investments that we've made in smart grid. My team looks at that. So very, very pleased and excited that we're able to take such a prominent role in the strategy for developing electric vehicles moving forward. So it wouldn't be an EV presentation if I didn't have a slide that projected the penetration of EVs. And so this one is one that we pulled together from a variety of different sources, and we like it because it kind of says with the same projection that, yes, we do believe that EVs are going to be increasing in numbers. And what this presents is 3 different scenarios based on that: an aggressive case, and a moderate case, and a conservative case. So then we can distill that down. The aggressive case looks at a compound annual growth rate of about 29%, and we're seeing higher than that projections now. So yes, we believe electric vehicles are coming. In 2016, I think the total number of plug-in vehicles registered nationally was about 254,000. And in 1 month alone, Tesla took 400,000 pre-orders for the Model 3. So the tipping point is out there, and once these vehicles start to show up, these customers are going to need to charge. So that's one of the things that we're interested in from a utility perspective. So when we roll this up at a high level, we don't expect to see any interruptions to the major distribution and transmission of electric service as a result of high penetrations of EVs. But we do expect to see an edge impact. And what I mean there is that the local residential transformers, we would expect to see clustering overloads as a result of that. We could do nothing about it, or we can try to proactively manage both passively and actively how customers charge their vehicles. So as a utility company, that's one of the major focus points that we want to have. Right now, currently projections are over 85%, 86%, I think is the last survey, of customers charge their vehicles at home, and they are typically residential customers. To get the vehicles in the hands of the customers that could truly benefit from them, and those could be medium to lower income customers, we have to provide additional charging solutions beyond the residential. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But for those residential customers, we don't want to go out and have to replace transformers because they're overloaded for a few hours of the day every day. When everyone comes home and plugs their vehicle in, it's the same time their air conditioners are coming on a hot summer day, cooking their food. It's always coincidental with the peak. So we'll be looking at ways in which we can incentivize those customers to wait and charge their vehicle after the peak. I'll talk a little bit about that. But that comes to my second point, which is developing innovative rate options. So some of what we've already experimented with in some other jurisdictions are time of use rates that only apply to the EV itself, not the entire house. And those have been very successful and encouraging those customers to charge off peak. We've looked at embedding demand charges in some larger chargers. I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then the third piece of that is the customer education piece. We think that if we don't do anything right, we should get the customer outreach and education piece right. There's a variety of different people focusing on that, but making sure that they understand what it is, that the benefits that EVs bring to them, where the chargers are located at, and they don't have to worry about whether or not there's going to be a charge available to them. And then the enhanced charging infrastructure. So that's making sure that the penetration of chargers meets the penetration of the overall vehicles. So these are kind of the 4 places that we focus our attention to, and we're looking at, from an electric utility perspective, how to serve that customer need. So this potential kind of breaks into the 4 buckets: residential, commercial, and public. And I mentioned the residential customer, and that would be a potential offering might look like if they already had an existing charger, then we would look to still encourage them to get on an EV-only time of use rate. That would require right now us to rewire their charger so that we're only able to measure the energy that charger uses, but for that small amount of rewiring work, then we could put them on a time of use rate. A typical time of use rate that we've experimented with in Maryland, the on-peak charge could be about 22 cents a kilowatt hour. Off-peak charge could be about 5 cents a kilowatt hour. So pretty good band there to encourage people to wait until after the peak to charge. If they didn't have a vehicle or didn't have a charger, then we would look to provide a rebate for installing a smart charger. What a smart charger allows us to do is it has embedded metering capabilities and communication and control capabilities that we could actually talk about or talk to that charger and actually manage that charge. I talked about passive and I talked about active demand response. Passive is the tariff, which encourages the behavior. Active is we can actually reach out to the charger and do something with it. We did experiment in Maryland 2 years ago with the demand response with 50 smart chargers, where we, coincidental to our peak energy saving credit program, we actually rolled the charger power output down by 50%. So when we think about these chargers, if you're not familiar with the jargon, there's a level 1, there's a level 2, and there's a DC fast charge. And so level 1 is plugging into a 120 volt outlet, and think about that like a hair dryer. It's about 1,500 watts. Takes a really long time to charge an all-electric vehicle that way. A level 2, think about like a clothes dryer, the load a clothes dryer would take, and that takes about half the time. So an all-electric vehicle like a Nissan Leaf or an i3 can easily charge overnight with a level 2 charger. And then you have a DC fast charger, and think about that like 33 1/3 level 2 charger, so or 33 1/3 clothes dryers. They're about 100,000 watts and up. And so if you follow what Volkswagen has talked about with Electrify America, they want to put multiple chargers, up to 7 or 8 of them in one location, and they want those chargers to be 100,000 watts up to 350,000 watts each. So that makes my antennas go up from a utility perspective in that the point source load of that kind of a charging depot, if you will, it exceeds a megawatt or more. So we're going to really need to take a look at how we serve that as a distribution utility and how much it's actually going to cost us to be able to serve that. So energy storage is a technology we're looking at to help mitigate some of those impacts, and microgrid technologies as well, so that we can try to maybe offset the cost it would take to heavy up a distribution system or even a substation to be able to manage that kind of load. So all of that is embedded in our viewpoint here. We've also, on the residential side, we've talked about what I call a renewable adder. We call it a green rider. And we first developed this in a program in Maryland. And what we really do is if the customer checks the box, we go out onto the RPS market. We procure RECs, renewable energy credits, to offset the energy use for that charger. It adds a fraction of a cent to maybe a penny per kilowatt hour for that customer. But allows that customer to have clean energy charging for their vehicle. And in Maryland, in a pilot of 200 customers, we had a third of those customers actually voluntarily chose the green rider. So we know it resonates with customers and it's important. And so that would be something that we would embed as a voluntary basis for the residential customers as well. And then the last one is the aluminum standard, right? That's the whole house time of use rate. I mean, that's nothing new or sexy, but we did see in Maryland 15% of the customers that participated chose the whole house time of use rate, which means they were smart enough to know that their lifestyle, actually they saved more money on the whole house time of use rate than they did on the EV only time of use rate. So getting back to our desire is to make sure that the customer has choices and that they can pick what works best for them out of those choices. We get to the commercial, we talked about MDUs, the multi-dwelling units, or MUDs, however you want to choose that. I think nationally they're recognized as kind of the largest underserved area. And so these are your condominium and apartment dwellers. And when I talked about that tipping point for EVs, I mean, these are the folks that we want to go after, right? They're the folks that could drive vehicles, but we're probably not going to be able to put enough charging infrastructure in the parking lot of an apartment building or of a condominium to satisfy that need. So that's where we're going to have to look to some public charging opportunities. But initially, we'd like to get with those property owners and we'd like to incentivize them to put chargers in and work with them on how to make a program successful for their tenants, and then what is it that we can learn from that. And then workplace charging is another opportunity that we'd like to seek. On the public side, public level 2 charging is really nothing new, but from our perspective, we'd like to look at those underserved areas. The commercial charging companies out there aren't necessarily going to put a charger in an area where there's not going to be revenue to return immediately off of that charger. So from our perspective, we think those are the areas that we want to incentivize growth in. So we want to make sure that we get those chargers out there. So we'd be looking to serve those areas with both the DC fast chargers and the level 2 chargers. So we also, in Maryland, and I'll talk about that in a second, we proposed an innovation fund, and here I left it here as ACE, but the innovation fund here is, let's see here, is basically what we didn't think about. So if we were going to propose a program with infrastructure, we would propose a certain number of chargers in each one of these different aspects so that we could kind of spread those learnings. But then there could be something we heard about, autonomous vehicles, ride sharing. We talked about electric buses a little bit, but that's a new area of electric transportation. School buses. We're keenly interested in school buses because a lot of them spend the summer sitting there doing nothing. And so from a vehicle to grid perspective, we believe that we could actually tap those batteries and use them during the summertime to help support the grid on those hot summer afternoons when the vehicles are parked in a barn somewhere. So once again, from a utility perspective, we really see that as being beneficial. So this innovation fund kind of helps. And the idea was it's kind of a grant that groups wouldn't have to pay back, but you'd come fill out an application. We'd have a panel made up of internal utility and external stakeholders where we'd review these applications and then award grants to further the infrastructure development. I talked about education and outreach, and fundamental to that is just the basic concept. I mean, do any of us really know how many plug-in vehicles each of the different manufacturers have? Because I'm constantly surprised when I see BMW and others have, the X5e and the 530e and the 330e, and Volvo's announced that they're going to go all plug-in in the near future. So, how do we get that information to the customers so they realize when they go out there, they'll say, well, I didn't even know that these vehicles existed. That rate calculator piece that says, okay, so what's the effective the economic effectiveness of owning a vehicle? How much money can you save for that? Range anxiety, how do we address some of those questions? So there's that basic customer piece of that. And then we talk more program specific. We've got the outreach piece where we say, how do we let customers know what these different programs are and how they're beneficial? In Maryland, and this program was from 2012 to about 2014. Customers were skeptic at first when we said, no, really, you can save money if you charge off peak, if you put this rate in. And we really had a hard time convincing them that there wasn't something hidden behind there that was going to cost them more. All they had to do was charge off peak. And so, the customers there that participated, we had a 98% satisfaction rate for the customers that participate in the program because they truly realized, yes, they could make the right decisions and they could save considerable money doing so. So making sure that gets communicated well. The subscription and engagement piece, I think we want to lock that down as a utility because that's the touch with the customer, making sure that we're representing them well and addressing any interest or issues that they have. And then the last piece is working with OEMs. This year, we were able to, through Exelon, pass discounts on to our customers. Nissan Leaf, I think $10,000 discounts last year we passed on. These are direct pass-throughs. We get nothing for them or nothing. We don't pay anything for them. They just come through and then we provide them to our customers. I think there's a $3,000 OEM incentive now for our customers on the Nissan Leaf, the newest model. There's a $10,000 incentive for the i3. So it's collecting all of these incentives and providing that forward as well. We would expect to see that as a big part of what we're doing. And once again, it's just to address those customer needs. So this is, it's public information, but this talks about what we're doing across the different regions. And what'll jump off the page immediately is that Maryland number. So in the state of Maryland, they have what's called PC44, which is their grid modernization effort. It has multiple work streams. EVs are one of them. Integration of renewables is another one. Rate design is another one. So they have a variety of different work streams that they're working on that they feel like they need to develop both technology and policy solutions to be able to achieve the modern grid. So what we were given in Maryland was a list of, Maryland is also a ZEV state, so they want to have 300,000 electric vehicles on the road by 2025. So there's a lot of aspiration to do that. So the commission brought in the National Renewable Energy Lab to model what the total infrastructure requirements would be for each of the utilities if we were going to meet those goals. And so they came back with numbers for us, and this was in a working group incentive that included utilities, included external third parties, the Office of the People's Counsel, so we had everybody there. And then the utilities took a third of those numbers, right? So we didn't want to threaten the competitive market. All we said was, well, if we're going to go forward and propose putting in infrastructure to meet the objectives, let's take a third of that and we'll leave 2/3 to the competitive market. So these numbers that you see in here really represent 1/3 of what the needs are, and it's specific to the Pepco, Maryland, or the Delmarva, Maryland area. But we'd be looking at 100 level 2 chargers with rebates of up to 50% of the cost, 750 rebates for just the chargers themselves. And then the Fleet Karma device it's an off-bill incentive program that we would want to test. Similar in Delmarva, Maryland. Workplace charging, looking at about 667 in Pepco, Maryland, and another 239 in Delmarva, Maryland. 200 multi-unit dwellings in Pepco and 50 in Maryland, or Delmarva. 440 level 2s and 149 in Delmarva, with 33 DC fast charge stations and 12. And like I said, this was all part of a working group that was chaired by a staff member of the Maryland Public Service Commission. And so the total to achieve all that with the Innovation Fund, with the outreach and education piece is what you see there, $44 million. District of Columbia and Delaware are more smaller programs, and that was really to test those assumptions in those jurisdictions as well, looking at residential, looking at the non-residential or the multi-dwelling unit, as well as some fleet units in there as well, and the DC fast charging. As I mentioned, the DC fast charging piece is really an utmost concern to us because of the power requirements and the fact that, when we start to cluster these units together, we think it's going to be a challenge to find locations in which we have capacity existing to be able to serve that, or to build that capacity is going to be expensive as well. So I mentioned that the success story, if you want to write that number down, the Maryland formal case is 9261, and there's all kinds of documents there on that aspect. As I mentioned, we did demonstrate that we were able to use smart EV charging. We were able to operate them in a demand response mode. The customers had a chance to opt out at any time if they wanted to. We did that 10 times over the course of 2 summers. And that was in conjunction with our Peak Energy Saving Credit Program. The program was $1.1 million was the budget. We ended up spending about $687,000 as a result of that. We only got to 154 participants out of the total 200 desired, but we still achieved all of our goals. And so we had the Electric Power Research Institute actually come in and write the final report for us on that, because we didn't want to say what a good job we did. We wanted an independent party to come in and be able to say that. And so all of that is on the Maryland Commission website, and you're welcome to go look it up by the case number and see it. So that's kind of it for my comments. I just wanted to say that I think that the timing right now is really perfect for not only looking at EVs as a means to meet state emission goals. I think the legislation now that we're seeing in New Jersey makes it favorable for greenhouse gas emissions, for overall efficiencies, to seriously consider transportation electrification as a source for that. The Charge EVC just released a report specific for New Jersey, I think, that looks at for New Jersey to meet its ZEV goals for vehicle penetration. I think there's about just upward 12,000 registered plug-in vehicles in the state right now, and I think they'd have to go over 60,000 to get there. So there will be some infrastructure requirements that'll be necessary to enable that. So we think the utilities are uniquely focused and positioned to be able to assist in that, more than willing to have those discussions. So with that, I thank you for your time.
Great. Thank you very much. Pete Rose will tell us about the initiatives for EVs in Quebec.
Sure. Thank you, Rona, for the invitation. Thank you, Princeton. Thank you, fellow panelists. How's everybody doing out there? Holding on, holding on. I know I'm competing between nice weather and the Twittersphere. So if you do check Twitter, I'll ask you to check two things and shout out if the NAFTA deal happens to happen while I'm speaking, because I know they're speaking right now. That's important for us. There was also a great announcement yesterday in the aluminum space, if anybody follows aluminum. Alcoa and Rio Tinto, along with the Canadian federal government, the Quebec federal government, and Apple, decided to invest in a new technology in a venture called Ilias, and that'll be producing the world's first zero-carbon aluminum. So some pretty exciting stuff to follow. I'm very happy. I changed up my presentation. I was going to use some slides, but decided to do it a different way. Give you a little bit of situational analysis of why am I here. Quebec, does anyone know where Quebec is? Have an idea? Yeah, I hope so. We have a lot of New Englanders in here. And so I work out of the New York office that represents the Quebec government. We have 9 offices around the world. 9 offices around the country, 26 around the world. One is in Boston that covers most of your area. And the other one's in New York, which covers the tri-state area all the way down to Kentucky, which I represent. And these questions of climate, energy, and electrifying transportation, I'm realizing that these are regional issues that we could be solving together. We might have different governance structures, but we definitely could bring collective brain power together in areas like this and other fora. We were just speaking with Vicki about this. Coming up in August, there'll be the Conference of New England Governors and Eastern Premiers, and a major focus of that will be August in Vermont, actually. So if anybody's from Vermont, it'll be in Stowe, Vermont in August. And a major focus will be on climate, energy, and transportation. Also, to just give you a size, maybe some figures are helpful. Quebec does $80 billion, almost $80 billion of trade with the United States. A large portion of that is happening within the tri-state area here, New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. A lot of it is done in aluminum, so that's why I gave that plug for aluminum. And also in the transportation sector, there are several big Quebec companies that are based in the tri-state area. One is Bombardier. Anybody know Bombardier? Above and beyond the airplane issue, there's lots of trains, whether you're subway cars, right? So if you're in New York City, if you jump on the New York City subway, you're on 3 cars. One either manufactured by Kawasaki, another one manufactured by Alstom, or the third one by Bombardier. You probably never looked at the medallion, but now you know. And so that's jobs that are being produced here and also up in Quebec. So why did Quebec get into the electrifying transportation space? One, because 99% of the power comes from hydro, so that's a pretty obvious reason. We have 8 million people in a landmass 2 times the size of Texas. Canada has the largest freshwater resources in the world. Most of them are actually in Quebec. So we got a lot of power. And we also have a big transportation industrial base, about 500-600 companies producing $10 billion in annual revenues, supporting 40,000 jobs. So we have the know-how, and we have the R&D to go with it. Montreal, next to Boston, is the highest per capita in terms of higher institutions of learning. So Boston's number 1 in North America, number 2 is in Montreal. Not saying you shouldn't stay here at Princeton, but if you want to do some research up in Montreal, please feel free. And so, the government decided to say, okay, what are we going to do in the electrification space? 43% of our greenhouse gases come from the transportation space. We don't have any gains to make in the power sector, because I'm looking forward to New Jersey getting to that 100% clean power soon. I'll let you guys know how it's going, because we'll probably do it next year or in 2 years from now. So that's a good thing. Okay, how are we going to electrify transportation? Well, we also have a different governance structure than down here across the border. There you have the provincial government, city governments mostly, and then you have one utility. Here, I'm listening to everything you're discussing here in the region. Several players, lots of stakeholders, lots of utilities, lots of this, lots of that. There's one utility. It's called Hydro-Quebec. So they decided to take the lead in electrifying transportation because they were providing the power to the system. And then they worked with the provincial government, the city government of Montreal, which has the largest population in Quebec, and then industrial partners, and they provided a cluster. And this has been going on for the last 6 years. So we've had some gains made. Quebec has 50% of Canada's EVs, even though we're only 23% of the population. Right? There's about 8 million registered vehicles in Quebec, about 8 million people, so 1 per household, let's just say. And there's about 25,000 EVs or hybrids in the province with a big goal of 100,000 by 2020. Now, how are we going to get to 100,000 by 2020? We have to put in some type of policy signal. And what Quebec decided to do was to look what was going on down here in the United States. And so someone mentioned, I think, 10 states or 11 states are part of a ZEV mandate, or a zero emissions vehicle mandate. Well, Quebec said, let me do that and see how that works. And so Quebec is the only province, or the first province, I should say, in Canada to have a ZEV mandate that has gone into effect this year, which will send a signal to automakers and dealers that you need to sell a certain number of these clean vehicles and get credits, or you'll get penalized. And so that is what we feel is going to help boost the EV and clean hybrid sales to get to that 100,000. So I'd be remiss if I didn't also talk about the whole carbon pricing issue, which I see as an issue in the United States, because if I wind back to when I started to get involved in this, there was something called the Waxman-Markey bill. Does anyone know what that is?
Oh, yes.
Right, in Washington at some point, what, 2010, 11, somewhere?
2008 to 10 or so.
There you go. There was a thought that there might be a carbon price in the United States, and then that didn't happen. And at that time, we said, okay, as Quebec, said, well, what can we do in terms of the carbon space? So we looked to California, which is very much a bellwether in the United States in terms of these issues. And they said, well, let's put together a cap and trade carbon market. So that's a good idea. So Quebec and California in 2013, 14-ish, put out the very first joint cap and trade carbon market. Recently, Ontario joined. So now that's 3 jurisdictions in North America. That's 60 million people covering about $3 trillion worth of GDP that has a price on carbon. Far from what we need, but a good start. Yesterday or the day before, there was an announcement of an MOU signed between the state of Oregon, Quebec, and Ontario. Not for Oregon necessarily to join the carbon market, because I don't want to speculate on anything, but to start working more closely together in this space. And then, again, energy, I'll bring the energy piece into it. We have a lot of abundant, clean, flexible, sustainable, whatever you want to call it, dispatchable baseload power in Quebec, water. It comes down into the United States. A lot of this is not consumed amongst the 8 million people in Quebec, so 34 terawatt hours per year are exported into the United States, mostly in New England. It's about 53% of it goes to New England, 23% to the state of New York. Very little gets to New Jersey because of infrastructure, obviously constraints to do that, but there's ways to get it to New Jersey too. And so we're looking to partner, because we learned earlier about deep decarbonization. And so if the power sector wants to get to that deep decarbonization, and nuclear power facilities seem to be coming, some offline, and then over years, a lot of them will come offline. What will be that baseload power for the region? Wind is great, solar's great, New York's doing a great job, New Jersey, I'm sure, is going to do a great job. A lot of those projects take at least a decade to happen, and if you want to stay under 2 degrees Celsius and warming in a very short period of time, like 2020, 2030s tomorrow, literally, a lot of these projects are not going to be online before then. So, maybe it's good to look up north, and Massachusetts did that, and we're in the process of hopefully providing a lot of power to Massachusetts. New York State is also looking to get greener. Quebec in New York State is not eligible for what's called the Tier 1 resource. So if there was a market signal, potentially there'd be more power coming down from Quebec, but we're very happy with what New York is doing in terms of their energy efficiency and their local development of renewables. But again, they like to say the 28 reservoirs up in Quebec, there's 63 generating facilities, 37,000 megawatts of clean energy. 28 of those reservoirs are North America's largest battery. So if we're talking about battery storage, yeah, there's a lot that's being done now in the industry, but there's a natural way to store your electricity, and that's up in Quebec. So last thing, I want to go off of what you talked about, which was the school buses. So in this transportation cluster that's kind of arisen because of all of these policies, not only does Bombardier electrifying things, but there's an all-electric school bus. There's a company called Lion Bus, very first company in the United States to produce a Type C school bus. That's the one with the cone that carries about 70 kids. Very first one in North America. It's on the roads in North America. Hope to get it to the States. And then that can also help in what you were just describing earlier in terms of storage and back to the grid. Tons of other companies that I could expound on, but I won't take up too much time. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. And did anything happen on NAFTA? Anyone? No? No? No one checked Twitter? Okay, good. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We're going to open it up to questions, but before I do, I have a couple myself. What can we do as legislators in terms of advancing legislative initiatives that would move this along, promote electrification, self-driving cars, the kinds of things that Professor Kornhauser, the picture of the future that he painted for us. What can we be doing as legislators to move this to fruition? Anyone?
So, I mean, I'll start. On the EV front, you know, I think it's always ironic to me that the folks that are trying to sort of talk about educating the public about EVs aren't necessarily the ones that actually sell them. And a lot of us in the region have faced challenges ourselves when we've gone to dealerships and said, I'd like to test drive a, you know, EV, and we'll be shown something else by the salespeople. So I think we have to do a better job in education. But I think that there are some disincentives maybe for dealers. I mean, for one thing, EVs are really, they don't have very high maintenance costs. So, you know, there's some thoughts that maybe they're not trying to sell for that reason. Maybe it's because they're just not, you know, as aware of them themselves. So, I mean, anything that we can do to raise awareness, anything that we can do to give incentives to people. I mean, I will say, even flying down to Atlanta, it's not, you know, a state that you think of doing really amazing things, but Georgia had incentives. You'd see a lot of leaves on the road when that was the case, when the kind of green people and the Tea Party people got together and thought that it was good to get us off of oil, so they were trying to promote leaves. I do think that incentives matter. It could be financial if there are revenue streams. It could also be things like HOV lanes, which some of the states have done that allow for clean fuels vehicles to be on
Are
them.
any jurisdictions making a decision that they're going to, you know, devote a certain percentage of their vehicle fleets to EV
Procurement, yeah.
equipment?
Well, I didn't mention in my talk, you know, what Waymo bought when they bought the Jaguars. They're EVs, and if you look at the providing this mobility as a service, these are fleets. And these are fleet owners. And if you look at a fleet owner, the fleet owner does not have range anxiety, does not have charge time anxiety. Why? Because they're managing a fleet. They know where they're deploying them. They know what trip they're going to serve. And therefore, they don't have the normal anxieties that all of us have when I don't know if I want one of those. And so, and then you look at the maintenance requirements and so on. So, if in fact we do evolve to this mobility as a service with a fleet operator providing this mobility to us and providing it, again, as I said, with shared rides, so that, you know, you have one vehicle carrying 3 people or 2 people instead of 3 vehicles out there, plus they'll naturally be electric. Why? Because when you do your ROI analysis, my goodness, it wins by a lot. And so that whole piece of it will go that way.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, we're seeing that now. We've been approached by several large fleet owners at the PHI level, and one of them being Amazon, FedEx, and UPS, and I know they're all highly interested in converting their vehicles over. As well as from a utility perspective, we're starting to convert a lot of our vehicles over to plug-in. We've got some plug-in hybrid bucket trucks in which the boom operates on battery storage. We've got some other work vehicles in which batteries end up providing the normal output that a generator would serve, so that we have, you know, kind of clean energy use in the field for those resources, and making sure that we can demonstrate the fact that as an industry we're walking the same talk as we would expect the other fleets to have. But I think it's also good that you're starting to see Tesla and others step up into the large vehicle market and say they're going to be providing all electric vehicles that will be reliable and have a range of moving forward. I think I just saw where recently Budweiser indicated they were going to step up to all-electric fleet delivery vehicles. So I think it's there. I think the incentive piece is a huge part, especially for a fleet operator, but it's also making sure that the existing incentives stay in place. I think we almost lost our federal tax incentive for EVs, and there was a lot of fighting to keep that in place. But if something like that goes away, I think it makes people take a step back and the desire to purchase EVs.
Also, I should mention that one suggestion related to range anxiety is to have charging stations in places where people can have assurances that if they're on the road, they'd have a place to charge. And one of the challenges to that is that, in general, there's a federal highway prohibition against using the right-of-way or rest stops for, vending in that kind of way, because historically, I guess people wanted to get folks off the road and into communities and spend money there. But some of your states actually have been grandfathered in because you already had some vendors, restaurants, rest stops, and all that. So, I would say one thing that legislatures could do is to say we're going to invest in more of obvious commitment to charging infrastructure along roads like that.
Maybe I can just, I think that was a great comment. The governor of New York recently announced that, the New York State Thruway was going to be completely, I'm not saying completely, but you'd be able to drive an electric vehicle through New York State on the Thruway. That's the intention to do. The interstate is a different story for federal reasons, like you said. Quebec already has some programs on these corridors that are very important. There's a corridor project with Vermont and a corridor project with Maine. A lot of that, some of the hurdles are on interoperability and standardizing things, but it's there. Municipal fleets are huge. So I live in New York City. It's the largest municipal fleet in the world, and there's definitely concrete action being taken by Mayor de Blasio to try to make his fleets cleaner. He has two initiatives. One is Clean Fleet, one is Vision Zero, so trying to make things smaller on the street, lower fatalities. The other is to reduce greenhouse gases. He just recently also announced that Central Park will no longer have vehicles on the loop. So if you're a runner or a cyclist in Central Park, you're probably going to be happy starting in June. So there's a lot of that. Quebec, again, very small municipal fleets. So the government does have the intention of making those either EV, full electric, or hybrid. The incentive structures are great, the rebates and everything you can do. If you follow, some of the bullish market, analysts, like from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, they're talking all about just the cost of the batteries, and their inflection point is the mid-2020s in terms of it being cost competitive with other types of vehicles. So they're thinking that you're going to get this boom in adoption of electric vehicles in the mid-2020s. That's speculative, but a lot of it's around price and lithium and things like that. So these incentives are important. The ZEV, these mandates to mandate zero-emission vehicles have helped in a lot of places. I think that's important. One thing I've noticed, to my chagrin, as I should say, without a French accent, is that New York City on one side is very progressive in terms of their fleet. In the city council, there's a bill going around to have all school buses be electric by 2040. That's way too late. So I think legislators need to be a little more aggressive on what they're proposing.
Rob had mentioned school buses in his presentation. I wonder if we could talk about buses as a vehicle for mass transit systems. In the city of New York, New Jersey legislators get complaints because the neighborhoods with the worst air pollution in Manhattan are those where there are idling buses. And it occurred to me that if the technology is getting us to the point at which the batteries allow for enough mileage for urban use, we can start seeing these in urban mass transit systems. Can anyone comment on where we are there?
So there's already some of that happening right now in the DC circulator bus, and that's not a traditional bus that just goes along one, pretty much linear route. It's a bus that sort of circulates around the city to sort of hotspots that tourists or others need to get to, Union Station, the mall, Georgetown. It's always $1, so it's easy. It encourages people to ride it because you're not worried about, do I have the right money change on me, or am I supposed to use a Metro card or what? It's very clear, it's $1, and there are a number of them now that are electric, and so they're clean and they're quiet and they're quite great. And I think, as Catherine McCabe pointed out last night, the VW settlement money is infusing a lot of resources that states are working together to decide what to invest in. And I know in our listening sessions that I mentioned, electric buses came up as a topic that there's a lot of interest in for all the reasons you cite, health and others too.
Yeah, Mayor Bowser, I think they just cut the ribbon on that charging facility for 7 of the DC circulator buses, which are Proterra buses.
Right.
And they all have DC fast chargers. And so interesting behind the scenes is where they originally wanted to charge those buses. We weren't able to serve them because of the age of the infrastructure. So we were able to work with the District Department of Transportation on an alternate location so that we could serve. But that gets back to this notion when you make a decision to charge 7 buses all at the same time, and they're all 100 kW or higher chargers, then from a distribution perspective, we've got to be able to serve that load. So we were able to work collaboratively with them on a solution that worked out. But I think as we see this, a lot of times the desire to put something that's going to benefit the community, we're going to run up against the cost of this. So that's where we're focusing our attention.
Well, let's turn to the audience. We have any questions up there? Yes, in the back.
Hi there, Charles Ellison. I'm with WURD Radio and also the Philadelphia Tribune. And I had asked this question the other day from a executive manager at General Motors. And the thing about electric vehicles, and I wanted to pose this question to you, and I came in a little bit later than I had wanted to, and so forgive me if you've already addressed it. This conversation about electric vehicles, and there's sort of an expectation or an impression that their carbon mitigation mechanisms or technology, but there's this worry or this concern that electric vehicles are not as carbon mitigating because they rely on electricity, and electricity, or the generation of electricity relies so heavily or is so dependent on fossil fuels. So what about, have you been exploring like hydropower, wind power, solar power, in driving these vehicles or empowering these types of vehicles or these transportation fleets? I know the representative at General Motors, and he was in China when we were having this conversation. He was saying that they are having that conversation a little bit more aggressively internally because they're realizing that there is that controversy over fuel cell powered or battery powered cars, that maybe we need to turn to hydro, sun, wind in order to reach that kind of future. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that. Thank you.
So hydro.
Well, it's kind of, for us, it's easy. So it's, from the hydropower that's produced to the vehicle, it's a clean experience. So I can understand when you're looking at the different mix. I'm seeing other states, New York, I'll just give the example because that's where I live. And obviously the greener the mix, the energy mix gets, the better footprint you have, ecological footprint you have when you're riding these vehicles. So yeah, I'm in a unique position from Quebec to say that it's, probably the cleanest experience you can have driving an electric vehicle is in Quebec.
And I think we're, lucky because we're in the Reggie region where these states have for a long time partnered to reduce emissions from the power sector and are continuing to do that. They revisited their cap and tightened it 3 times. We were all hopeful, and many of us I know worked on a federal standard, the Clean Power Plan, that would have helped to push even more investment in that direction. But there are other things that have really been moving the grid more generally to cleaner fuels over time. The price of renewables coming down, as we've been talking about over the course of the day, the switch from coal to natural gas, that's just, the markets and things like that. So, it's definitely an issue in those areas that people live near power plants. That's a legitimate concern to run those numbers. But in general, you really can't reach the kind of greenhouse gas economy-wide targets that many of these states have on the books, which I showed earlier, without a real combination of a push for renewables and other clean technologies. It could also be keeping nuclear on, as we talked about earlier, and electrifying the fleets. That's really how you get the kind of 60 to 80% reductions in the time frame that we need.
I would say PHI doesn't have generation, but certainly Exelon is the largest carbon-free generator in the company in the country with its nuclear fleet. But I think the renewables penetration is actually increasing, even in a small way. At PHI, we've got over 53,000 rooftop solar customers across all three of our brands. We're adding about 1,000 a month to that. So, I mean, we're now in almost 1,000 gigawatt or megawatts of solar generation across our footprint. And while it takes an awful lot to power a charger, this penetration is just increasing. And so I think it's over time, as we start to see the increase in electric vehicles, we're going to see a natural decrease in energy use as a result of energy efficiency that's going on now. People replacing their air conditioners with more efficient air conditioners. Their Energy Star products are getting even more efficient. So I do think that it's going to be a combination of the generation mix changing over time, as well as overall efficiency kind of reducing that need. So yeah, it's easy to point to that today and say, well, how much carbon goes into it, all the way to the amount of emissions of the truck that pulls the electric vehicle from the factory right to the dealer. And I think there are institutes that have calculated that end-to-end emissions profile for EVs, but the reality of it is once you're driving and charging them, there's not a lot of emissions associated with that once the generation mix starts to go to a higher penetration of renewables. So I think that it's going to be a matter of time. Everything's going to progress positively in the same way.
Yes, this question from Mr. Rose. There's a planned transmission line from Quebec to through Western Maine down to I'm not sure exactly where, but it'll feed into the ISO of New England, and I believe the contract now is going to go to Central Maine Power. So, but other than some construction jobs, maybe it's not really going to benefit Maine particularly, except as part of ISO. My understanding is also that the rates that you'll be charging for that hydropower are considerably higher than what you pay in Quebec because of lack of subsidy for exported energy. And so that makes it less attractive, of course, to Americans. So I just want to get your thoughts on the future. Sounds like you have a lot of excess hydropower that isn't being used, and how we can cooperate to take advantage of that, because it is the cleanest and most reliable, most non-transient form of power around.
Thank you for your question. In my position as government relations for Quebec, I can't speak to rates that maybe Hydro-Quebec would be, and that's the utility that would be providing the power. These are projects that I've obviously heard of. I know more about the projects potentially going into the state of New York, but I do know what's going on also in New England. These are developed by U.S. developers. This is a signal that was given by the Massachusetts legislature to procure a large amount of out-of-state renewables because of what the state needs. We've seen projects, someone used the acronym BANANAS earlier, or NIMBY, or, a lot of these projects, they might be announced and sound like they're going forward, but they oftentimes are challenged in courts or by groups. So the projects that you're referring to, I don't know to date currently, when that's going to happen or if it's going to happen. I do know that the Massachusetts state government did go with an option that would bring power from Quebec, but with, again, a U.S. developer. So I can't answer when that's going to happen. But you're seeing more and more of this need in especially New England, because of certain constraints, to be getting this clean power into the region to meet some of its goals. Again, New York's a different case, and that's one I'm more familiar with. So I think, like any relationship, energy relationship, when there's a regional partner like Quebec that can help meet local goals, obviously we want to figure out how we can foster that relationship, and vice versa, because the relationship goes both ways. And I alluded to that earlier, especially in our trade relationship. So follow the news like I will on Twitter to see where any of these projects go. But I commend the government in Massachusetts for taking this this decision to help clean and decarbonize their power sector.
Commissioner?
Yeah, the transportation infrastructure currently use the gasoline tax for roads and bridges. Under the EV world, how do you see that to make it fair for all the drivers? How do you charge some kind of surcharge, or what do you envision?
A number of states already are charging either registration or annual fees. I don't remember exactly how many, but it's something that people are interested in because there is there's both the decision to try to induce this new technology that has multiple benefits societally, but also the sense that, roads and bridges cost something and they're using the infrastructure, so there's got to be some kind of user pay model. So there are some places that have registration fees. I think Pennsylvania is one of them, and there are others. At the federal level, I happen to sit on a congressional study for the future of the interstate highway system, and so we're having some of these conversations because with the combination of fuel economy standards, changes in driving patterns, and also the move to electric vehicles, and the fact that nobody's been really willing politically to raise the gas tax at the federal level, we already have this problem. And so, there's a concern that electric vehicles is just going to make that worse. So we really need to move to probably over time a different business model, although in the short run, I think, many folks would feel like some attempt to deal with the gas tax and the fact that it hasn't been raised in a long time would also go a long way to help. So, our report isn't finished yet, but, we're looking at all these options. I live in Virginia where they've actually started to toll part of I-66. It used to be a clean fuels vehicle opportunity or many people in a carpool. Now they've actually taken that clean fuels vehicle out of the picture, and you have to pay even if you're in a clean fuels vehicle unless you have at least 2 people right now, and you pay. And the toll is variable depending on congestion. So I think states are already starting to experiment with other ways to generate revenues, and the feds might look to do so in the future as well. Some states are experimenting, as I mentioned earlier, like Oregon, with more of a VMT approach as well. So that's on a voluntary basis. It's a pilot right now, but over time, it might become mandatory in some states.
We have a question over here.
Yes, thank you very much. And let me just say thank you to all the panelists. It's been fantastic. I'm from Massachusetts, Mark Pacheco. I'm the Senate President Pro Temp in Mass, and we've worked on a whole range of issues relative to electrification, expanding electrification into the grid with hopefully offshore wind coming online, and that announcement with hydro. Quebec could probably be coming as soon as the end of this month. I'm told by the executive branch that there'll be an announcement on the firm or the firms that will be chosen in terms of offshore wind development with that procurement process. In a number of the different proposals, obviously Quebec Hydro has also bid as part of these developments. When we saw the map that Professor presented to all of us earlier in the day of the East Coast and the purple outline down the East Coast for offshore wind, and you combine our Northeast with the potential of hydro from Quebec, there's an exciting opportunity for all of us, going forward in terms of increasing, electrification with EVs, utilizing that new option for energy. So I am getting to a question. And the question is this. We've been doing a lot of work in the Massachusetts legislature, and sometimes working with the executive branch, we don't see things moving as quickly as we would like to see them done, and so we're trying to put them in law. But there is an option that we as state legislators, or at least through the executive branch folks that are also here, that we could do as a region. And it's simply leading by example. We all have fleets. Our states, our municipalities, our regional governments, all have fleets that get recycled every year. For 4 years now, I've tried to talk to my executive branch, saying, why don't we just count up the number of vehicles that we have? Let's take a look at all the other vehicles in our RGGI states, and why don't we put out a market proposal to the manufacturers? Is that viable?
So there were some conversations that were led by Matthew Getz on my team and others, NESCOM, and I think Cassie Powers, who used to be with us, but who's with one of the associations that deals with state energy, was working with CalSTART and actually thinking that it might even be broader than just this region, that it might be a state procurement in a bigger way to try to get economies of scale. I think the California GSA, for whatever reasons, decided that it wasn't something that they were going to pursue, but we do have some good work that's already been done to sort of support the states in this region, thinking collectively about procurement. I don't really know the details of exactly where that stands, but I'm happy, Senator, to follow up with you because I think that's a real opportunity.
We are at 3 o'clock, and so it's time to end. I think it's been a very stimulating conversation. I want to thank all of our panelists for being with us today, and thank our audience for the questions.